Connector podcast. It's Thursday evening. We're on the Smart Connector group and we're here live with one of my clients, Max Lawrence. Welcome, Max.
Hi.
So Max is an ADHD business coach, but he has an incredible career, which we're going to talk about before that. So we're really going to get into this whole topic of ADHD tonight and talk about why so many entrepreneurs have ADHD, why some of them are undiagnosed, how to actually recognize ADHD, and also why ADHD can be a business superpower, not just a disability. So we're going to be looking at all of those issues tonight. So Max is the expert. So Max, I think probably the best way to start is just for you to introduce yourself and just to tell your story.
Yeah. Hi. Thanks, Jade. Where to start? I basically discovered that I had ADHD only just under 2 years ago after a career of building boutique hotels in Morocco, in Marrakesh. And I ended up going out there through my dad's business and very quickly sort of ended up building my own. And after school, I didn't go to university. I kind of knew that I wanted to go to Morocco. I loved Morocco, and it was going to be a year. It ended up turning into 12. And basically, I ended up buying land and building 2 boutique hotels that became very well known and very busy. And I kind of managed in my chaotic way, because I didn't know this at the time. I know now, looking back, that I was quite chaotic, and I was very distractible, and I'd be into one thing one day, and my dad would always say to me, you don't finish things, you start always new things, new exciting things. I want to do this, and so we get going, and then next week it's that, I want to do that, and that I now know was definitely fueled by ADHD. And in Morocco, I did, I got it together, and I always kind of succeeded with things, but I really had, I got onto some projects that were really quite big, and I borrowed money from banks and from family, and I needed to make this work. So when the motivation is there, it's much easier to focus. And so I had these successes, and I also ran a production company in Marrakesh looking after lots of fashion shoots, and it was all very exciting. And it was exciting because I needed excitement, so I was always running towards the next exciting thing. And this is the thing with ADHD, is that if we're not interested in what we're doing, we just lose interest. We just get our mind gets dragged to something else, and we something catches our eye, and we're off in a new direction. So I was very much like that, and then the hotels were successful, and I mean, about hotels, I built 2 hotels with a friend, one of them, in a year, and I had these 2 simultaneous building sites going on, one in the Atlas Mountains, one in the Palmery, which is just outside Marrakesh, with about 350 workers on these 2 sites, and I was rushing between the 2. It was like one hotel building site wasn't enough for me. I needed to have 2 going on because one would get too boring, so I'd go to the other one, and I see this pattern all the way through my life now, going right back to childhood, when in the 80s Sundays were horrible days for me, because in those days the law was that no shops could be open except a newsagent from 9 till 12 to go and get your papers and your sweets, kind of thing.
I remember it well.
Yeah, it's like another world. But I found Sundays excruciating, because my dad's office, which was in a stable block kind of next to our house, there were no workers there, at the weekend, because I used to go into the office and chat to all the girls and stick envelopes, and so Sunday was this dead day. And I remembered this in therapy, and I did 20 years of therapy before I got diagnosed with ADHD, and I used to go and set off the burglar alarm by pushing the panic button secretly, because I knew that 10 minutes later there'd be a police car at the gate, blue lights, all very exciting. I only admitted this to my parents, in the last probably 10 or 15 years, but I think they kind of knew. And so I was always hunting after what I now know to be dopamine. I just thought it was like adrenaline. I needed excitement. if it was dull, I was bored, I was kind of low energy, but I could get very fired up and, around exciting stuff. And so, yeah, there's this theme through my childhood and my adolescence and, early adulthood in my 20s, building these hotels. But I got very bored when the hotels had opened. The big challenge was to build them, staff them, train the staff, equip them, furnish them and for them to be beautiful and to get them to work. And we were running at very high occupancy, and it was just like, it became mundane. It became the same thing every day. It was just like I felt like my work was done. As soon as it became repetitive, I was kind of I was bored, and that's where the kind of alcohol stuff started kicking in, and drugs, and I think I wasn't stimulated enough, and so I was kind of self-medicating, not knowing I had ADHD, on alcohol and stimulants and Morocco joints, and people self-medicate on all sorts of things, gambling, porn, but for me it got quite hairy.
Yeah. So obviously I know your story, and it is an incredible story, and we've talked about you writing a book one day, and I really think you should do that. So let's get on to this this issue of addiction, because addiction and ADHD often go hand in hand, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I now know that ADHD people are 6 times more likely to struggle with addiction, whether it's with food and overeating, binge eating, which I also struggle with. Chocolate is my problem, at night especially. But yeah, food, drink, drugs, anything that floods the brain with dopamine for a few minutes. Because we're lacking in dopamine. Normal people's dopamine's there, and in ADHD our dopamine levels are down here. And so when you eat a piece of chocolate cake, or you have sex, or you have a pint of beer, it comes up to a normal place. And that's why a lot of ADHDers say, well, I just kind of feel normal on it. They'll take hard stimulant drugs and say, well, actually I feel kind of normal. And at the beginning you do, until you start going too far with it, because it just brings the dopamine level up to a point where you're in perfect condition. And another example of this is in a drama. Why are the fire services, ambulance services, police all full of ADHDers? Because we're really good in a crisis. When everything's normal, we're distracted and looking at the ceiling and looking around, and then some drama happens. We get the rush of adrenaline with dopamine, and the level comes up to normal, and then everybody else is like jelly. What do we do? Because they've got too much of it flying around, but we've been raised to the normal point. And so when my grandmother choked on an olive, the rest of my family were all like, didn't even know what to do, not to move. And I just calmly stood up, walked around the table and went, fuck, and the olive shot out, because I was in a place with enough dopamine now that I could function well.
Right. So now that you're talking about this, we are talking about whether ADHD can be a business superpower. Now, business, and particularly entrepreneurship, it can be very stimulating. And doing deals in particular. Your business was a property business. You did deals. And, I know I have a property business as well. I know that there is something very addictive about doing deals, because you get that rush, don't you? You get that high. So is that why ADHD, it can be a business superpower as well as a disability?
I think it's that. And I think it's also ADHD people, we tend to think, we look like we're not thinking at all because we're like lost, but actually the head is going 1,000 ideas a minute. And that's why we look like we're not focusing on what's happening, because we're elsewhere with ideas. And our ideas, a lot of ADHD people think very much outside the box. So we would approach problems in a different way to other people. I didn't know this at the time, but my approach would be quite different from everybody else's. And when I chose to put a hotel on the side of a hill overlooking a Berber village and nothing, a friend of mine said to me, "You're completely mad to be buying this piece of land." But I could see how it was going to be, and 2 years later it was full. And so we do look at stuff in a different way. I think we're good problem solvers, and so yes, there are lots of people out there who've made real successes, especially in entrepreneurship, because we're not very good employees. We don't turn up on time. We forget what we're supposed to bring. And so a lot of ADHDers tend to get fired a lot. Getting fired is something very, very common. And you know, I've read stories about people being fired 100 times in 2 years, you know, which is excruciatingly painful. You know, if you need that job, whatever it is, flipping burgers or driving a bus, but you can't deliver because your executive functions, the functions which execute things. So ADHDers have all the knowledge. We have no problem with knowing in the back of the brain. We have the knowledge, we know what to do and how to do it. But we really struggle with the execution of things. So getting started or completing tasks and organization, you know, it can be quite chaotic. I got around it not knowing what I was dealing with, but I got around it by building teams around me. So I didn't manage all those people. I built little teams, and I would speak to one person who I knew was really organized. And that's how I must have, you know, made these things happen, by just, you know, coordinating people with a very rough crayon, you know, rather than a precise pen. But yeah, I think the whole success, there are so many ADHD big success stories in our country. You know, Richard Branson's one, and, you know, there are lots. And so it's the creativity, the creative thinking, the different thinking, the problem solving, and also, yes, this need for excitement and risk taking. So we can be very impulsive. I suffer a lot with my impulsivity, but the impulsivity that nearly killed me later, you know, through addictions, I believe that's what made me buy that crazy bit of land on the edge of a hill. And, you know, when everybody said no, I just was like, yeah, I'm doing it. And, you know, I made lots of decisions that turned out to be fortuitous along the way. But people were always looking at me sideways and going, what is this guy on? You know.
And of course, when they were saying, what is this guy on, you were on a lot, weren't you, after a while? You were, genuinely.
Oh yeah, I mean, you know, the drugs and the drink kind of, it got to a point where it was all kind of, I was in my 20s, so it was quite normal to be doing partying, but I never quite knew when to end the party. And you know, it started going bad, and I came back to England, and I went through a treatment center, and I was introduced to Alcoholics Anonymous, which I hated, but in the end really saved my life, because I got sober in Alcoholics Anonymous 15 years ago. And I lived 9 years sober. I then had a few years of drinking normally, living in the countryside, very relaxed and happy. And it went well until something didn't go well. And then I kind of went through another spiral, and it was that spiral that actually brought me to find out about ADHD. And I will say, because I think this is important, that so many people get missed. You know, now they spot kids in school and they go off to the psychiatrist, and the parent takes them and listens to the questions the parent is asking them. And so many parents now are sitting there listening, going, that's me too, that's me too, that's me too. I wonder if I might have, you know. And so loads of adults are being diagnosed with ADHD now that weren't before, through their children. But I was missed for 20 years of therapy, some excellent therapists in London. You know, nobody ever mentioned ADHD to me. A top London psychiatrist who I saw for 2 years, he missed it. He recently apologized to me and said, you know, I kind of could have spotted that. He's retired now. And I said, no, what, you saved me as well. You kept me going through that time. And eventually I got to this place where this one therapist based in Wiltshire actually said, you might want to check out ADHD. And I did. I got an audiobook. And in London one day in the car, I was driving, listening to this thing. And at the end of chapter 3, I just broke into tears at a traffic light, because it was just like, I suddenly understood myself. I had the explanation for all this craziness.
Really?
It was very, it was overwhelming, because you struggle with addiction, and I was sober, but I felt like I was white knuckling it the whole time, because I had this incessant obsession voice in my head sort of torturing me. And that has basically vanished through the ADHD diagnosis, through understanding, but also through understanding the lack of dopamine. What my brain was hunting was dopamine, and dopamine can be found in food, sex, drugs, you know, all sorts of things that are fine unless you do too much of them. And as ADHDers, we don't really have a gray position. We're binary. We're either on or off. We're black or we're white. And so the middle path, it doesn't really exist very much for us.
Yeah,
So
it's such a fascinating topic. So today, Max, you work with a lot of business people and entrepreneurs, so high performing, high functioning professionals and
yeah.
entrepreneurs to
Mm.
help them solve ADHD. Now, at first sight, that's like, well, how on earth do you do that? So how do you actually work with your clients
Yeah.
to help them?
Well, firstly, I should say there is no solving ADHD. ADHD is here to stay. If you have it, it's going to be there. So me using those words, solve ADHD, what I really mean is solve your ADHD problems, the issues you have. So people come to me, and they're very successful. Most of them are really, doing well. They've got companies that are thriving. And they come with there are some common denominator things. So it's organization, it's procrastination, it's motivation, it's hopping around and, like a blue ass fly, never being able to sit still, and constantly managing this endless stream of new ideas that's so tempting to us all the time. We're like magpies. Anything that glistens, we're on it. But we have so much going on that we often miss the routine stuff that we don't like, the admin stuff, the speaking to our teams about more mundane stuff. And yeah, I mean, people basically know that they're struggling with something. Then they often realize that they've got ADHD, they get diagnosed. And it, like me, it's a massive revelation, and they want change, because when you get to 30 or 40 years old and you've really suffered with this, not understanding yourself and upsetting people around you, terrifying people around you, you kind of just you think, I wish I'd found this out 20 years ago, but it's not too late. And now I really want my life to be better, and the people around me who are near to me to be better. And so people tend to be really keen, and some of them have struggled a long time and they've tried it their own way, and they're just fed up. And this whole executive functions business is really tricky. It's actually very simple, but I don't think it's possible to help yourself. And I'll give myself as an example here. I'm helping people who have trouble procrastinating. These are really bright people. They've got great things they're doing, but there are things that they're just struggling to either get started or get finished. That to-do list, or those to-do lists that are everywhere, are long and annoying. And I'm able to really quite easily help people break out of their procrastination. It surprises me how effectively I can do that with them. But when I try and break out of my own procrastination, it's really hard. And actually, that's what brought me to you as a client. Is I've got this great coaching set up, coaching ADHD entrepreneurs, which I love, and it's probably the most satisfying work I've ever done. But I want to, get better at social media, and I want to put out a video of this, and I want to put out, make a film of this and write a book of that. But you know what? I could be here 10 years later in the same position, just coaching away. And that's why I came to you, and it's been so helpful. I mean, you've unlocked something. Well, you're doing to me what I'm doing with my clients.
Yes.
They need, and I need, somebody to make me accountable, because until there is accountability, it's very hard to do something that doesn't really have a fixed due date on it. We always push it to the back, and we've got so many things going on that, it'll wait another day. But there are things that I'm doing with you that have waited 2 weeks, and I've said, no, I'm doing it in the next hour. But many days and hours later, it's still not done. So I'm finding that with you, I'm getting this. I think I'm getting a similar experience to what I'm providing my clients with. Obviously, I'm able to provide them with quite deep insight into the ADHD intensity of procrastination or disorganization. I teach people how to use a calendar properly. Most people come in saying, I use a digital calendar, and I say, show me. And they show me, and of course I can show them immediately why it's not working, because I developed my own organizational method over 15 years without knowing why I was creating it. I just knew that I needed, to get things done. So I boiled this thing down into something that's become very, very, essential for me. And as I teach it to other people, they come back sort of 2-3 weeks later saying, this is amazing. This has changed my life. And that's so satisfying to me, because it's my system. It is very simple. I can teach it in an hour, but what's hard is sticking to it. So I'm helping them through their objections, which are rooted in childhood experiences, and their objections and their kind of resistance to it. You know, we resist new things, and ADHDers resist hard.
Yeah. So Max, I've noticed a comment that says ADHD is a label, and I've noticed this with a lot of call it disabilities, mental conditions, brain configurations or whatever, because my nephew had he was diagnosed with Asperger's, and I know now they just call it autism and so on. But some people really say, look, that is wrong to actually label people, and that really people should just, like, brains come in all sorts of different configurations, and people should just be accepted for who they are without actually putting these labels on them. But, you know, as humans, it helps us, doesn't it? We want to identify with a tribe. And if we see that somebody is actually got a cluster of symptoms or even just a brain that looks like ours, it makes us feel less alone, doesn't it? So is it a bad thing to have an ADHD label or diagnosis?
Is it any worse than calling somebody an entrepreneur? You know, an entrepreneur is just somebody who does business and things for themselves to make money. Okay, it's a group of symptoms that we've put a label of entrepreneur on it. Okay, so there's no negative connotation with entrepreneur. And I think that connotation, the negative connotation, it very much depends on who you are, who you live with. Kids, I hear kids, my kids at school, kids call each other ADHD, like we used to call people, other things back in the day. And, oh, you're so ADHD. Well, yeah, it's a label. I'm so glad to have the label now. I mean, the label has been absolute relief. And I think what's worse than having a label is knowing there's something going on, but not knowing what it is.
Yeah, definitely.
You're gagging for a label after 20, 30 years of that. A statistic that I think is really quite revealing is that on average, an ADHDer who gets to the age of 30, by the time they're 30, they will have received 10,000 more negative comments towards them than a non-ADHDer. And so that goes right back into childhood, to parents. Oh, come on, you're always 8. Why? Teachers, will you please look at the board, Thomas? If only he tried harder. He's got great ability, but not using it. If he could put himself together. All those comments. Friends saying you're always late. We can't rely on you. All those little comments.
Why can't you pack your own bags and actually keep them tidy? What is the matter with you? Why don't you pick your clothes up? Why don't you just drop everything on the floor? And
I mean, it's for the child who grows into a teen, who grows into an adult, it's a constant bombardment of negative comments around things that we just, well, that's the way we are. My son, he's getting better, but he's also got ADHD. And that was part of my motivation when I was diagnosed. A month later, he was diagnosed. Yeah. And I just knew I had to know everything about ADHD that I could. So I read everything, watched everything, read the scientific neurological papers. And I had to know, because I wanted to do everything I could to avoid him having this, this long wait to find out, why things are like this. But yeah, I think it's, all those 10,000 extra negative comments are like somebody chipping away with a hammer and chisel at your self-esteem. Yeah. And basically ADHD's self-esteem shrivels up inside them over the years. And by the time somebody gets to the end of university and they've maybe, not made it through university because they couldn't turn up to lectures on time, hand in work, because at university, it's a month later that you've got to hand the work in. Well, a month goes past, they've forgotten about it. They get an alert 3 days before, and it's a mad rush. And people, so many ADHDers leave university in the second or third year. And, so this shriveled up self-esteem inside has basically started believing all these negative comments. And what I'm doing in my coaching is helping give them the sort of scaffolding to have the executive functions to be organized, but also to regrow that self-worth that has been shriveled up. We have a rubbery kind of ego around us that protects us from all these things. and we say, yeah, I'm okay. But actually inside, it's very painful. And I hear that every day from people.
Yeah.
And that's why going through learning these new skills often triggers emotions. You know, the sort of fourth part of ADHD, after the impulsivity, hyperactivity, inattention, is the emotional dysregulation. We are affected by our emotions more than average people are.
Okay, so why is that, Max?
Well, the whole thing about ADHD, I mean, it's really not a very good name for the diagnosis. It doesn't really describe it well. You know, if it were being called something else, I would suggest dopamine deficiency, because we are deficient in dopamine. Dopamine is the neurotransmitter that carries the signal in the brain of reward. So you have sex, you eat a piece of chocolate cake, you feel a rewarding sensation.
Yeah.
That rewarding sensation is there for a reason. If we didn't feel rewarded when we ate, we wouldn't want to come back for more. If we didn't feel rewarded having sex, we wouldn't want to come back for having more. And the human species would die out. No food, no sex, no babies, no survival, you know. So it's there for a good reason, but we lack it. And so dopamine helps people to lock on to stuff, to feel that rewarding sensation. You're writing an essay, you've written the title, you get a little bit of reward. Oh, I've written the title, I can carry on. First paragraph. Oh, good, I've done the first paragraph. Reward feeling. I'll write the next paragraph. What happens with us is we don't get that reward feeling because we haven't got the dopamine. And so we just get distracted. We're not being rewarded by having written the title of the first paragraph. So we just, oh, a squirrel on the tree, or, you know, oh, what's that noise over there? I'll come back in just a second. 3 hours later, you haven't come back because you've forgotten. Our memory, our working memory, short-term memory is absolutely shot.
Yeah.
You know? So actually, I can't remember what the question was now, so I'm having an ADHD moment.
Yes, but it's just such a fascinating discussion. So let's talk a little bit more about addiction and about your own kind of addiction journey, and how you kind of fell into that, and what made you really, what was the catalyst for you actually you know, going into recovery and all of that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was all, I like to think that it was all, you know, manageable, and it kind of was for a while. And then it became, you know, the things that were happening to me, including ending up in a coma, car accidents. You know, I drove my own car off a cliff once, and that was jumping out 2 meters before the cliff because I was completely high and paranoid and thought I'd, you know, distract the police, you know, and think, you know, oh, he's down on the rocks, dead. And so, but, you know, my shoelace could have got caught on that pedal, and I, instead of getting out 2 meters before, I could have gone down with it. And so these things kept happening.
Yeah.
And, you know, it was all very colorful and terrifying for those who care for me. And, you know, I was very lucky that, you know, my wife, who was, you know, we've been together for 25 years now, you know, that I had somebody very strong who stayed. And you know, but for my parents, you know, I put people near to me, my parents, my sister, my girlfriend at the time, just through horrific stuff, worry, and you know, it builds up and it gets to a point where you just know it can't go on like this. People are going to have to leave you because they can't handle it anymore. Yeah. And so, you know, AA was, I struggled with AA at the beginning, and I struggled because I have this impulsive nature. I'd be walking to an AA meeting down the King's Road or whatever, and walk past a bar, and I was going to that AA meeting, you know, and the next thing I know is I'm having a pint, you know, and it's all very nice, but I didn't intend that. And this is what happens, you know. This is why, I mean, another statistic that is really quite scary is that the life expectancy of untreated adult ADHDers is reduced by between 12 and 20 years. So if you smoke a packet of cigarettes every day for your whole life, it reduces by, I think, 9 years. So ADHD is 12 to 20 years. It's absolutely shocking. And that's to do with the mixture of obesity from overeating, alcohol and drug problems, driving accidents, because inattentiveness, you know, you don't see stuff coming, you're not paying attention, lots of car accidents, and also the impulsivity driving a car. You know, I'll overtake the truck now, bang, and you're off. And you needed to really calculate a bit longer.
Yeah. And
It's a
I've
real
also,
roller coaster ride that costs people their lives all the time. And so when people say, this thing about the label, oh, it's a label, we shouldn't be calling people like that. Getting that label is a lifesaver, because you can identify what you're dealing with. I didn't know what I was dealing with. I know I'm a smart, capable person. I've done all sorts of things, and I can make all sorts of things happen, and I have. But at the same time, I was an absolute liability. It's treacherous. And so this whole thing about, getting diagnosed and being called ADHD or ADD or whichever it is, I hope more and more people are diagnosed. For the moment, we say that 5% of the population roughly is ADHD. In a prison population in this country, 35% of the prison population is ADHD. And that's because of the impulsivity, the just like go for it kind of attitude, which for me enabled me to build great businesses, because I was just like plow through, go. But if you imagine that same go on a kid who's growing up in a rough neighborhood, and the only option he's got is to, a friend says, let's go and rob this corner shop. Go, let's go. No thoughts. Just like me, mine took me to a positive place, basically. Yeah. But for so many people, it's not positive at all, whether it's addictions or crime, just very destructive.
Yeah, and of course the other thing that is, my sister's ADHD. She also got a late diagnosis, and she has it quite badly, in fact. But one of the things that she is very apparent about her is the inattention if somebody else is speaking. So the communication can also really be affected by that, can't it? And of course, people can then get very impatient and very intolerant. And it's like, you never listen to me. You're always talking about yourself. Is that very common as well?
Yes. I mean, the effect on relationships is massive, because for that reason, people get fed up of having at least the impression that they're not being heard and listened to. A lot of the time we are listening, we're hearing it. Yeah. But we've also got another wheel turning and another wheel turning. And so it might take a poke to get us to come back. Yeah, no. And very often, we actually have heard, but we kind of need to spin it back, play it back. That is destructive in relationships, because everybody needs to feel heard. And the interrupting is also another thing. I'm a terrible interrupter, and I think we get very understood for that. People think, oh, they're just so rude. They just want to talk about what they want to talk about. In reality, I've worked out that the reason I interrupt is because my short-term memory is so bad that when I'm in a conversation with you and I have a thought that I want to say to you, and I know that if I don't say it right now, in 8, 10, 12 seconds, I won't be able to remember that thought. It will have just evaporated, and I'll be sitting here going, I knew I wanted to say something to Jay. So there's this desire to throw stuff out there as it comes into our heads, because we know it's not going to hang out in our heads for very long. But we get very misunderstood, I think. A lot of people, and we can learn to tame these things. It's not easy, because it's like, if you're 40, it's certainly not easy. If you're maybe if you're 8, you're still in that, but old habits die hard, and it is a battle. And that's why coaching people, you have to have them for long enough to really be able to help, because it takes time to embed a new habit in a non-ADHD person. But to embed it in, for it to bed in an ADHD brain can be more challenging, and there is also this defiancy that comes with ADHD. So there's a thing called oppositional defiant disorder. So we all know people who are basically, whatever you say to them, they say the opposite, whether it's right or wrong. So that kind of can come with ADHD for a lot of people. There's a bit of defiancy. So if somebody says, will you sit down, please? No, I won't. And if it had been the other way around, it would have been the same opposite answer, So, and that maybe is also part of the superpower, people telling you, no, you will never manage to do that. Yes, I will.
Yeah.
The determination.
Yeah. And I've also heard that hyperfocus is
Yeah,
associated with ADHD. And as I
yeah,
said, I've got it in my family. I don't think I've got it severely, but I do think that I probably, would fit a sort of minor diagnosis, because, of course, all
yeah,
these things sit on the spectrum. Because one
mm,
thing that I definitely have is this thing about hyperfocus. So
yeah,
if I get into something and I really am into it, I don't have this issue maybe that other people have of like, this is boring, I want to stop or whatever. I
yeah,
will go into it and I will get into it so much that I will not even notice time passing. And I will
yeah,
just go on and on and on and
yeah,
on, like way beyond the limits of what
yeah.
anybody else could. And I do recognize that that has served me very
Well,
well in
yeah.
some respects.
But can I ask you something? How often has that hyperfocus been available to you when you're doing something that you find boring?
It's terrible. Well, never. And
Right.
that is, of course, the other thing because, and I don't know whether this is me or whether it is just anybody, but I have no tolerance for things that I don't like. I literally cannot engage with them.
Yeah.
So I think, and I mean, maybe this is, as I said, maybe this is just,
Maybe you're one of us.
everybody or lots of people. I don't really know,
Well,
but. But I think what you've described here tonight is a very, very, very clear profile. And I think people that are watching this and listening to this, I'm sure that some of them will be thinking,
mm,
wait a minute, this sounds like me.
yeah, absolutely.
Um, and what I just said about the hyper focus and actually having completely unable to engage with the things that I find boring.
Yeah.
um, you know Other people will also, I think, perhaps resonate with that as well. So they're a whole cluster of things, aren't they?
Yeah. I mean, going back to the hyperfocus thing, the reason we hyperfocus is because when we are really interested in something or passionate about something, I might be into making model planes. And for that, I concentrate for 10 hours non-stop through the night, to get this thing done. But for ADHDers, we are not able to do that with something that we are not interested or passionate about.
No.
The thing about this is that normal people have enough dopamine to enable them to have a really boring task in front of them and go, that's a really boring task, I don't want to do it. An ADHDer goes, oh, that's a really boring task, I'm just going to do that instead. But a normal person will look and go, the same boring task, and it's boring to them. They go, oh, I don't want to do that boring task. But then they glance out over the horizon, and what they're looking for on the horizon is the consequence of not doing that bit of work. And so once they see the consequence, they can weigh it up. The weight of the boring task for 2 hours or the weight of the consequence. And then they'll go, no, I don't want the consequence, I'm doing the task. That's where they get their motivation from looking out to see the consequences. ADHDers don't look for consequences. We're not registering them. It's all about now. We live in the present. And if that doesn't look fun, then I'll do this instead.
That is so well expressed, Max. It's absolutely fantastic. So we have a question here, which is, does Max use a daily or weekly planner?
So this is, I absolutely use a planner. I didn't own a planner or a diary or a calendar until I was 30. I was living in Morocco where everybody is late and it's kind of normal. But when I moved to England and I'd turn up at the dentist half an hour late, and I thought, like in Morocco, they might say, oh yeah, you can slip in afterwards. No, you've missed your appointment. The next one is in a month. And I very quickly started realizing that living here, I'm going to have to start towing the line because otherwise I won't get anything done, So I bought a Moleskine week on 2-page planner with a pen, pen and pencil. And I used that for 4 years and it improved massively. But the problem with it is that it has no voice. When the Moleskine planner gets another book sat up of it, I can't see it anymore and I'm not going to look at it because a planner is only as good as it's only useful if you are looking at it. So the digital version in our phones today has an added advantage, which makes a complete difference in that it can shout at me and it can say, beep, 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 beep. I need you to look at me now because there is something I need to show you that you need to see now. And I then get the alert. Oh yeah, in 2 hours, I've got to be. And without the voice in the planner, it's no good. So I teach people to use digital calendars, and I have a system that I've kind of come up with myself over the last 15 years. Since the 4 years of Moleskine ended, I went to digital, and I really battled with it because there's so much functionality and so many, our thing can do all this stuff. And of course, for me, all that functionality was just a distraction. I would get lost and distracted from actually what I'm supposed to be doing in that calendar. So I removed all the extras and boiled it down to something very, very simple that I could manage. And I now realize that what I built is great for other ADHDers as well. And so the first thing I generally teach people in the first couple of sessions is my organizational system, which has only 2 rules, which is pretty unique in that, normally there are lots of rules, but mine only has 2 rules. And they learn it easily, and it does change everything. Because when you're no longer late, when you can turn up on time with the things you are expected to turn up with, not the right day, but the wrong week, you turn up and you're not getting this feeling of failure. Oh, I did it again. I felt, because we don't plan to be late. And those little failures all the time, they are chipping away at that self-esteem. And what happens is self-esteem grows back through being organized, and the stresses of all these kind of arrows being fired at you. You're late for this, your mother's calling you, and it's all like that. These stresses lead to, when there are multiple stresses at the same time, we go, I'm overwhelmed. I can't function. And overwhelm can last 5 minutes, or it can last a year, anywhere between. There are overwhelms that people get stuck in for more than a year, and it becomes a depression. And, and the other thing I should say is that so many of us are misdiagnosed. I had anxiety and OCD from 11. I was on all sorts of medications for those, and therapy for anxiety and panic attacks. And, at the end of the day, when I went on ADHD medication, the anxiety, the OCD, and the panic attacks went, because they were just symptoms of the ADHD. They were comorbidities with the ADHD. So all these doctors and all these therapists and all these really wonderful, helpful people totally missed the ball for 20 years in my case. And I'm glad I got diagnosed, because my nightmare is thinking, imagine I hadn't been lucky enough to find out, and I had the rest of my life, which probably would have ended in catastrophe, not ever having understood oneself, and it's not to have excuses, it's to have explanations, finally getting explanations. And this is the same if you're 15 or you're 20 or you're 50 or 80. What a gift to finally retrospectively get an explanation to all that stuff that you always wondered. Am I just a nutcase? Am I just useless? Am I just, incapable?
Am I just really different? I think that's the thing.
Different. Yeah. I mean, we're all different.
Am I so different that I'm never going to be, people are never going to understand me? I think that's what happens maybe when you have when you have a profile like that.
Yeah.
That you think.
It's very genetic. So we tend to find that it's, now that I know, I can see it pretty much in my dad. He's not bothered because he's old enough to not really, worry him. But I look at his family, and in his family, there are 3 cousins. And in the children of those cousins, there is a lot of ADHD, Asperger's, it's all over the place. And yeah, so we've got Richard here who he says I have anxiety and panic disorders, and he's a high functioning autistic. So that is what he is. So do all those comorbidities, as you call them, do they all go together? Is it common for ADHD people to have autistic traits, for example, or is it just very different? I wouldn't say it's common to have. I mean, there are a lot of people out there who have ADHD and are also on the spectrum. They can go together, but I don't think it's a majority. There are quite a lot, but what does go very, very commonly, or what gets discovered before the ADHD are, we struggle with anxiety, depression, OCD, and those things are all relating to serotonin as a neurotransmitter. So
Yeah.
when people go to the doctor and say, I feel depressed, and the doctor gives them SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, they slow the reuptake of the serotonin to make more available serotonin. And that serotonin is the happy chemical. It's what, if you're depressed, anxious, or got OCD, it's all fear and anxiety. And so the happy chemical, more of it in your brain, enables us to feel less stressed, anxious. And it's the same. So dopamine is the ADHD version. It's the neurotransmitter of reward, and not having that reward feeling has all these provokes all these symptoms of not being able to lock on to things, focus, bad memory, impulsivity. So yeah, very often people will find that they've got anxiety or depression, and they will be treated for years and years and given SSRIs, when actually what they really need is the ADHD version, which isn't raising the level of serotonin, but it's raising the level of dopamine. And I mean, I actually still take both. I've been on SSRIs for my panic disorder for many years, but I take the SSRIs and I take the similar thing in the dopamine version, because I don't want panic attacks, and I'm not actually prepared to even go there to find out whether I still have panic attacks. It's like panic attacks had me leaving my car halfway through a tunnel or on a bridge because I was terrified and I just had to get off, and the traffic wasn't moving fast enough, so I walked. Impulsive. Very scary. It's so these things do go together. I think that because people aren't treating their ADHD, they're suffering with those symptoms, which are often depression, anxiety, and the depression is also fueled by the repetitive failure. If you're losing your job every 3 weeks, you're going to get down about it, and you're going to start really feeling life is where's it going? And obviously a part of that 12 to 20 years less longevity, a part of that is made up by suicide, sadly.
So sad. Of course, and that is the leading cause of death amongst young people, amongst men. It really
men
is.
in their 40s. I mean, So, if you don't know you have ADHD, and you are having lots of problems in your relationships because you are emotionally dysregulated, and when somebody says to you, would you mind putting that dish over on the, and you go, what the heck? That's what happens when you're emotionally dysregulated. Your reactions to comment or normal requests can be out of place, and so that's not going to help a relationship, unless there's basically unconditional love there. So friendships, partners, work relationships, colleagues, there's a limit to how much they can handle, and they just start going, the guy's nuts. He's not nuts. He's lacking dopamine, and with a simple pill taken in the morning, once in the morning, he will transform almost overnight, literally. The first time I took the ADHD medication, it was like, I've often heard it described as not being able to see very well, and then suddenly somebody gives you a pair of spectacles and you put them on. I can see. I didn't realize how badly I couldn't see. And ADHD medication is like that. It doesn't cure ADHD, but for the 8 hours or the 3 hours, depending which medication you take, it's like putting on glasses. You put the glasses on, your brain works as everybody else's does, and then it runs out at the end of the day, and you come back to being ADHD max, and you go to bed. And it's all right. During the time that you're out and about, interlocking with other people and organizations and things, you're better off having the glasses on because you kind of see like everybody else does.
That's amazingly powerful. So we've got a question here, which is FOMO, fear of missing out, typical for ADHDers? I would imagine the answer is probably yes.
Yeah, I think the fear doesn't last very long, because we then, if we think we're missing out, we very impulsively go wherever we think we're missing out. But yeah, fear of missing out. I don't think I've had so much fear of missing out. I think I had fear of missing out when I first got sober. Then I felt like I was missing out everything. Everybody's out there drinking and having fun. Actually, half of them are drinking and not having fun. They're drinking because they are compelled to drink, because they do it all the time, and they can't survive their own emotions without a chemical to change the way they feel because they're not feeling great about themselves or about their lives or about whatever it is. And so, we're a highly drugged up nation. Alcohol's legal. It's a mind-changing chemical like all the others.
Yeah.
And it certainly kills more people than all the others, way more people.
Yes.
But people, are in there's a lot of fear when you start talking in this country to people about, maybe, not drinking, or you say to them, oh, I'm not drinking. It's amazing. If you're standing in a pub and they realize you're not drinking, most people will do everything they can to get you drinking. Oh, go on, just have one, you'll be fine. And it's mainly because they feel uncomfortable drinking, because it's kind of raising the question of, is it all right? Are you all right? That the fear of missing out. Yes. When I wasn't in a pub and I thought everybody else was, then I felt I was missing out. But all I have to do is drive around at about 11:30. At the time I was living in London when I got sober, and I'd drive around and see girls vomiting all over each other and, on the floor with broken heels, and guys fighting, and, they probably don't even know what they're fighting about, but it's what happens when the pub closes.
Yeah.
And that kind of balanced out my fear of missing out. And, I had my version of leaving the pub in a bad state. It would take me to some very dark places, with, done the drinking. Now you want the next thing. It's going to be a drug or another drug. And you end up in very dodgy places with dangerous people. And age helps as well. I think the fear of missing out has become less with age. Sorry, I am. Okay. And the one symptom I haven't talked about is that talking a lot. It's one of our big things. So you have to time me out.
Okay. Well, so Max, how can people get hold of you? What's the best place to find you?
Sure. So, my website, which is Max Lawrence with a W, LAWRENCE.co. So www.maxlawrence.co, not .com, just .co.
Okay. So go there if you want to get in touch with Max. Now, if somebody has been listening to this and thinks, wait a minute, this is me, all of a sudden the light bulb has gone on. How would they go about getting a diagnosis for themselves? Is it as simple as booking an appointment with a doctor?
It's not simple. It's simple if you can go privately. But as with a lot, with the NHS, and certainly mental health departments of the NHS are very overstretched. I think the average waiting time for an adult to be seen for an ADHD assessment on the NHS is 2 years plus. So that's a long time when you're struggling.
And that's here in the UK, because we have listeners on the podcast all over the world. So I would imagine that in some countries it's non-existent.
Yeah, I mean, it really varies around the world, but certainly with, apart from Scandinavia, where you probably, you call up and they send somebody around 10 minutes later, because they've got the funds. In the UK, it's really hard. And we have thousands of people on waiting lists to get an assessment by a psychiatrist, and hopefully, get a diagnosis. And once you have that diagnosis, you can start working on your ADHD before having a diagnosis. I coach people who are not diagnosed officially. They're not on medication. The medication really helps. It helps us focus so that we can focus on understanding our stuff, learning new tricks, and basically building scaffolding around us to survive ADHD better. But so I coach people who are not diagnosed. But the advantage to getting a diagnosis is that the medication is so effective. There is no other psychiatric, psychological problem that needs medication where the medication is so effective as ADHD. ADHD medication works for 80% of people with ADHD. And then if the stimulant medication doesn't work, there are other routes, non-stimulant medication, which are less effective. But the ADHD medication is so effective that I say to people, they say to me, should I try the medication? Should I get diagnosed to try the medication? And I have to say to them, I really believe everybody should try it, because for me, the day I started taking that medication, my life changed so massively. And so even if you try it and you decide you don't like it, I encourage people to try it, because the results can be totally life enhancing.
So can you just walk into a chemist,
Yeah.
and say, "Can I have this ADHD medication? I think I've got it."
Oh no, 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 absolutely not.
Okay,
Because,
so
stimulant medication is a controlled substance. You have two types. There's the methylphenidate and there's the amphetamine based. But obviously, amphetamine is a class B narcotic. So this is medical. This is made for ADHD people, but you absolutely cannot buy it over the counter. You need a prescription from a psychiatrist, and it's expensive. So if you're doing it privately initially, it's a lot of money, but then your psychiatrist can pass you back to your GP, and then you can, once you've been stabilized and titrated onto the right dose, your GP can then provide you with an NHS prescription. So you just pay the NHS prescription amount, because it's hundreds of pounds a month otherwise. So for many people, it's out of range, and this is something that I really hope will change, because if you can't wait 2.5 years for an assessment, your only route is to go and spend an outrageous amount of money for a 3-hour assessment. We're talking around £1,000. And for a lot of people, that's just not possible. And so they have to wait. And ultimately, that wait kills people.
Yeah.
It kills people because it can be really hard. And, some people can't hold on.
Yeah. Oh, it's absolutely tragic, really, isn't it? They ought to, they ought to do something about that for sure.
Yeah.
Well, Max, all I can say is that it's been such a pleasure. I knew this was going to be an absolutely amazing interview, and I'm sure that people who have listened to it, they're going to be thinking quite long and hard about some of the things that we've been talking about today. So I just wanted to thank you so much for coming on. And this is.
Can I say one more thing, Jane? Before
Do.
the end? There's one thing I'd like to put out there, and that is that when we were tribes living in Africa, when we were hunter-gatherers, and there's research done where they've sent scientists to work out what the percentage of ADHD people are in each tribe. And they've looked at tribes, and basically we've understood that before farming, when we were all hunter-gatherers, the most successful tribes were the ones that had the highest percentage of ADHDers. Why? Because we're great in the impulsive moment. The tiger runs past, off we go, bang, bang, bang. We will go and catch that tiger. We're great in that, crazy moment. But when farming came along, and farming, you have to sow your seeds at the right time. You have to remember to water every day, and you have to, get them out of the ground before they shrivel up. It's all about timing. It all became about time. And we live in a farmer's world now. So this thing about the stigma, actually, going back, in different contexts, we were top dog, the ADHD tribe. We were the best. We grew biggest, strongest, because we had more food. We had great ideas of making tools. We were absolutely ahead of the game. But since it became a farmer's game, and our modern world is a farmer's game, you've got to be at work on time, you've got to be at school on time. I just wanted to put that out there for anybody, for the ADHD people. We are not useless. We are actually really quite worth having around. And this leads to mixing teams in the workplace. I think there's a lot more to do about getting neurodiverse people into roles to work to work with all the other people, because there's stuff that we can do really well. And so, this is another area that I'm really interested in, is promoting active recruitment of neurodiverse people to do, GCHQ use dyslexic people for recognizing people in crowds, because they've got an ability, many of them, to pick out faces from a crowd very quickly. And so we can be.
Yeah, I mean, look, that's a really interesting topic, because when I ran my design agency, it was a very high level design agency, and it was also a production company because we specialized in TV design.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is that all of the designers, without fail, all of them, every single one was dyslexic. These were highly talented people working in one of the most competitive fields in the world. And really, for our business, for what it did, it was absolutely one of the best in the world. And ironically, they were all of them, they were dyslexic. And they also played bass guitar. A lot of them play bass guitar. I don't know why. It's got to go together.
But look at coder, people programming computer programs. There's a very high percentage of ADHD and autism. in computer coding because they have the right minds for it.
Yeah.
And you know, there are all sorts of things, and I hope this becomes more mainstream. You know.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, so ADHD, a business superpower. It can be a superpower, but you have to learn how to manage it and control it. So Max is the guy to help you with that. So thank you so much, Max, for coming on the show today. It's been such a pleasure, and what a great conversation we've had.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for keeping me moving forwards with my procrastination. I recommend you to a lot of
You're
people.
very welcome. Thank you, Max. Thank you.